So welcome back, friends of the sun. We're still having this assisted reading of the book from Lawson, and we're still discussing relativism, or what he calls a non-realism. For me, that's a relativism. The question is it self-refuting? He says yes, in a sense, but that's something we accept because only under realist premises something is, in this sense, self-referentially self-refuting. So the idea from Lawson is that we somehow have to embrace the problem of self-reference. And that's very interesting. So therefore, let's just jump right into the book. We are at the prologue. And I still have to open it even though we see it already. Okay, we have a prologue, right? There are many summaries, many paraphrases that might be given of closure. It could be said that closure is a theory about how we make sense of the world in a world that is open and not closed. So this is one of the points that he makes. Closure is a new conception that does not grasp the world based on the premise that language represents the world and says what is real about it, but that it is somehow an interpretation for which we decide at a certain moment. It is a theory about the operation of the human machine that identifies a single process enabling both experience and thought. Yet, although these descriptions are appropriate, they are also misleading, for the story of closure is one that requires us to abandon terms such as reality, language, and world in favor of a new terminology. These new terms allow to escape the deep-seated paradoxes of the present in which we are currently enmeshed. And that's what I said before. This is basically what he aims at. He somehow wants to... here he says escape the deep-seated paradoxes, but I think in other parts he says we embrace it. So and this prologue basically will give us not an introduction to the term of closure, but explain why it is necessary that we have a new term. And it is related to the deep problems of realism. And the question is the story necessary? Some are convinced that we need a new framework. They, as he says, can skip this explanation. And then we come right to the history of a mistake. And then he says I will argue that the framework of contemporary thought is not only undesirable, but is enmeshed in a predicament so insistent and destructive that it is not sustainable at all. And as I'm not a native speaker, I had to look up predicament. I hope I say that right.
Predicament.
Predicament. A difficult, unpleasant, or embarrassing situation. I don't know if I understand that completely. A difficult or unpleasant situation. An example of a predicament is a wife walking into a restaurant where her husband is having lunch with his mistress. A situation, especially an unpleasant, troublesome one. Maybe not a politically correct example, I don't know. Anyway, let's keep reading. As we see then here, so the predicament is found in our acceptance of the perspectival and relative character of our knowledge and beliefs, and at the same time, our refusal to accept the consequences of this recognition. So I think that's also what I found in the article on Stanford on realism. So it says the question of the nature and plausibility of realism arises with respect to a large number of subject matters, including ethics, aesthetics, causation, modality, science, mathematics, semantics, and everyday world of macroscopic material objects and their properties. Although it would be possible to accept or reject realism across the board, it is more common for philosophers to be selectively realist or non-realist about various topics. Thus, it would be perfectly possible to be a realist about the everyday world of macroscopic objects and their properties, but a non-realist about aesthetic and moral value. So what this article claims is that we have widely accepted a non-realist stance, but then philosophers can do so selectively. And so we are often, when we come to a theoretical discussion, we actually say, oh yeah, sure, the world is real. There's a real language under a real world. underlying our language. But this is what Lawson says here, right? So he says that we are unwilling to accept the consequences of this recognition. For example, our desire to uphold moral behavior despite our experience that others adhere to different moral codes, in our desire to believe that science might uncover the ultimate laws of the universe, and yet our suspicion that science is not itself value-free, in our recognition that there are as many histories as there are points of view, yet our conviction that certain events cannot be denied as have taken place. And yeah, I really wonder, so there are problems that come with a non-realist stance. For example, if we look at the Ukraine-Russia debate, if you meet Russians, you would be surprised what kind of perspectives they hold on history. So how to deal with the consequences of non-realism, that's really what I wonder, and I hope he shows that later. But now we just show where are the difficulties that we have right now. So in the face of the contemporary predicament, many have argued that we should retreat into some supposedly safe haven in the past, into a less complicated world, a world without perspectives, a world that allows for some elementary observations, some simple neutral facts, into a world that enables objectivity. And I sometimes feel this is Jordan Peterson, right, who criticizes modernity, like all the consequences of non-realism. And I think who somehow suggests that it is better to return to a more simple society that had a realist stance, for example, on sex and gender. I'm not one of these people who completely deny the claim that there is, let's say, a biological sex. But I'm also not affirming it, right? And I think the status of the discussion where we are, it's a huge confusion, and not confusion in the sense that I say it's wrong to believe that there is no sex, right? It's rather a confusion that we cannot ultimately clarify that issue. And I don't think we can turn back that kind of wheel of time. We cannot go back to a simpler society where we just somehow all agree that we now have realist premises. And so this is what he says, a retreat is not an option. And he believes that also in the project of science, there is the predicament that we really want to be realist, but everything we do shows that we cannot be realist. And he brings up two examples, the mathematical counterpart in Gödel's theorem, these are the theorems about the incompleteness of math, and its scientific counterpart in the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum theory, which basically says that the observer and the observed cannot be distinguished, if I understand it right. So yeah, and he has now an excursus where he investigates how the different logical and mathematical disciplines try to remove the paradox. Now the question is, of course, what is the paradox? I believe he wrote his dissertation about that, the problem of self-reference or reflexivity, the circle of self-reference in which contemporary thought has been increasingly enmeshed, typified by rhetorical self-denials and the use of inverted commas, is not sustainable. So yeah, they become more and more complex but never solve the issue. And he says here right at the beginning, truth in the sense of the possibility of a correct description of an independent reality has had a good innings, but its time is over. He also calls it the abandonment of truth. So what is the contemporary predicament? The circumstance in which we have become unable to express what we seemingly wish to say, with the result that it is no longer apparent what could be said at all. So I think we have to understand it like that. We say, of course, our language somehow represents reality. And then we get involved in the philosophical framework of working out such a theory. And in the end, we realize, well, what can we say at all? And we are confused about ourselves suddenly. So, and yeah, there are many influences that have led to the situation. One of them is certainly contextualism, which also includes a retreat from facts that can be seen to have been underway for a long time. Certainly also in politics, we see that facts don't count as much anymore. Narratives are more important, and it's very hard to control these narratives And authoritative powers, of course, have a strong interest in maintaining the illusion of a certain fact-based realism, but at the same time undermining it with the strategies that the non-realism has worked out, or the strategies that are abused for non-realism covered as realism. So what do I mean by that? I think I have to provide an example to make that more clear. What I mean is a politician who stands in front of the cameras and starts to develop narratives that he makes up. He mashes facts together, he makes facts up, and at the same time he claims that this is all a certain kind of realism. So he's not transparent about the way of how he produces his theories by claiming that he is actually a realist. And we see that all the way, especially in politics, because realism has at the same time the aura of being more authentic. So, but yeah, here we talk about the rejection of facts, moral facts and facts whatsoever, and what can be regarded as an attempt to maintain the sanctity of facts. There were those who sought to identify a strict distinction between facts and values. Is this a distinction which left matters of morality, aesthetics, and religion beyond the reaches of truth or falsity? So this is where we wanted to restrict our scientific language only to empirical instances. So we don't want to talk about morality first, we want to clarify what we can say with regard to referencing something. And this can be summarized as the project of the logical positivists that were encouraged by the writings of the early Wittgenstein, allowed its supporters to argue that through a combination of observation and logical deduction, along with a precise defining of our terms, a body of knowledge could be constructed based on a secured foundation of agreed facts. And this kind of analytic philosophical endeavor was for a certain time quite successful. Nevertheless, these theories came soon under attack and were replaced by certain kinds of contextualisms, although a certain scientific realism has survived. Nevertheless, I'm about to finish here. I just want to look very briefly at the question of moral realism. And moral realism is quite simple, right? You say genocide is wrong, and somebody asks why? Because it is. It's a fact, right? And then moral anti-realists, they have to do this kind of mind statistic that is pointed out here, certainly making fun of anti-realists or non-realists. Anti-realism and non-realism are a little bit different, by the way. Non-realism just says, well, I don't want to commit to realism. Maybe it's possible that one day we get what the world really is, but I don't know, like so far you haven't achieved that, right? So, and then these moral anti-realists, they say, of course, I think genocide is wrong. I'm not some kind of monster, but of course the claim just has no propositional content. So this is like getting into the nowhere land of meaning, where you basically say that no claim, especially about moral questions, has a real content and it's an illusion anyway. Or maybe it does, but there just isn't anything that satisfies the truth conditions of such claims. So they make it more complicated. Like I say genocide is wrong, but how would we actually figure out like that it is wrong? What would make that statement a true statement? How could we make that true? We needed like a God who tells us that, right? So I'm justified in participating in a moral discourse on formal grounds, or if you accept a deflationary theory of truth. Deflationary theory of truth, I have to remember what it was. It means we actually kick out metaphysical terms like God, but also words like soul or even world, because world is not something that we empirically experience, that we don't have in our experience. We only have objects in our experience, right? So, and really, the onus is on the realist to explain how moral claims work to me, because it seems really complicated and strange. And don't we all disagree all the time? So that's the problem. So when I say genocide is wrong, I only mean that in the sense that I would prefer it if you would not genocide. Thanks. And yeah, I mean, they make here fun of anti-realists, but this is a bit the problem where we are. right? So another country does something where you may say, oh, this is genocide. And then you come up with an explanation, it's wrong. And then the other country says, so what, right? So what is the moral ground, if not a revelation by God? I mean, some people claim they have revelations from God, but then also we have different gods. And how do we know that that is true, right? So we are really in a predicament here, as Lawson would say. The question is, how do we solve that? Now, we won't come in the next readings to the solution of that. We will still read why we are on a mistaken path, as Lawson says. So if you like this, then please share, like, and subscribe. And yeah, live long. Don't take reality to be the measure of everything, and prosper.